But please, we need him to have that one.
Thank you. So we should get started. First question, anybody?
Yes, Danny's lover. You said some very interesting things yesterday in the press conference about Black American history. Do you have further things to add to?
The question is our willingness is always to talk about these things. We derive whatever understanding, a better understanding, from our willingness, and I underline that word, to talk about this and not suppress that. So that's basically what I was saying, Now, what does that have to do with the film? I don't know, because in this sense, what we try to do, all of us have tried to do, is to bring the depth of our human experience to the process, and that is within the context of the story that Lars was trying to tell.
What was your reaction when you read the script for the first time? Custom.
I have a mixed feeling. The first time, I was a little bit unhappy.
Why?
Unhappy because I thought it could have a story brought to me by a brother, an African American director. I would love that, I would love that. But that was the first part, and the second part is I really wondered how this guy who was not American could be that accurate in his description of the layers which can be inside each character throughout the film. And that was really beautiful. And at the same time, I felt like I had room for bringing my own experience to that kind of story.
Okay.
First time, my reactions were one of really anxiety about what was happening here, what was the possibilities. But each time you read the script, as always, you either become drawn more and more into the writer / director's attempt to convey an idea, and the idea is much broader than just slavery. So I began to say, okay, now let me try to imagine that and imagining what's happening within that framework that he has put out here. And I found at each time that I read it, I found it more compelling. Now, if I had read it the first time and put it down and said, okay, so did my all of a sudden my anxieties vanish? No, because now you have the words. Now you put this in the hands of actors and put this in the hands of the director and the choices he made. Then you have to say, what is in this guy's heart? What is he trying to say? What's in his heart? And as all of us saying, the one thing that comes to this family that you build around the film is trust and what's in the heart. And the directors, what we feel is in the heart, the director is something that we could work with, and then that certainly helps us in the process.
Okay. And your reaction?
When I read the script, first of all, I know Isaach and Danny were going to be in the movie. Okay, so that provided something of a little buffer for me about, is this cool? Because some of the script seemed very outrageous in its ideas, also in its melodrama. I have no problem with stereotypes because sometimes that's where you got to start when you really want to talk about something. Yeah. And I trust Lars just from seeing his other work as an artist. Now I know his reputation of being a provocateur, and I just, the more I read it, I had this reaction a couple of times like, wow, can you really, is this going to wash? Can you have this kind of discussion? And I started getting seduced into that because I think one thing that Lars does is he's a guy that struggles with pushing what's acceptable to find the truth. And he abhors a kind of comfortable political correctness. So he takes something that's so fraught with shame and injustice and guilt and anger, like a story about slavery. And it feels very outrageous. But I realized the shadow of that, for me anyway, was a lot about what was going on now, politically, all through the world. So, of course, the story is a slavery story, and I'm not saying it's not about slavery, but for me, maybe it's because I'm not black. I go more to, it has resonances, to situation like in Iraq, or some feelings I have about capitalism.
I have a question to Danny Glover. In the Internet Movie Database, you are quoted for saying, "Every day of my life, I walk with the idea I'm black, no matter how successful I am." Could you comment that?
I think it's probably self-evident. I mean, I mean, it certainly it's not a distraction for me. I mean, the realization that we live in a world that's often polarized into one in which it is those and the other, them and the others, is quite evident. I don't in any way, it no way debilitates me. All it means is me that I acknowledge it, and the things that I do often are designed to help me to struggle more, to identify what are the places where I can struggle, where I can feel that the change is happening. Those are all the things that I do. So it's simply an acknowledgement. In no way do I go up and crawl in a corner, or go and go off on some sort of self-destructive binge because of that. But the fact is that I know that, and I do that, and I understand that, and that everything that I come into contact, it really makes me realize that. There's beautiful things about that as well, aside of the negative things. Sometimes I see people in the midst of struggle and trying to change what's happening in their neighborhood, in their community. I don't care where it is. I don't care whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Africa or whatever. And I'm saying, boy, look at all the richness that these people bring to their condition and to their situation. So what I'm saying is that the fact that I said that is clear that I understand where I stand in the world, basically.
The parts you get, that you have gotten through your career, have there often been like references to your skin color in the script? I know that Sidney Poitier worked for, I think, 16, 17 years in cinema before he had a part where there was no reference to
There was no
his
reference to
skin
skin color. I mean, you take the obvious. I mean, take a role like Lethal Weapon. There were three other actors that they were considering for it. I was having to be one. The other two actors were white. You know what I'm saying? So there was no reference at all to my skin color in the first Lethal Weapon at all. So, I mean, and that's a good sign because it was what we often call non-racial casting, whatever, you know what I'm saying? But that was a good sign, in a sense. There's a sense that those possibilities have. I think that's clearly one of the things. Whose stories are told, whose stories are important, whose stories are validated, whose stories are marginalized and dismissed. Another way just to think about storytelling, I had this discussion, running discussion, about the movies that we see, and the movies that are out there. And I was taking a movie like, for instance, Troy, a movie like Gladiators, or you could make a movie like Alexander the Great. All of them, in a sense, define the idea of empire. And when empire gets anxious, as it is now, it comes up with a flurry of movies about its self-imposing, of reimagining itself, or reconstituting itself, or strengthening itself. I'm in a movie, I'm seeing these movies come out. I end up talking in a movie where the major discussion is whether Martin Luther King is a hoe, or where the major discussion is whether Rosa Parks just sat on the bus. That's the level of my dialogue with a movie, and that movie is Barbershop. You understand what I'm saying? I'm saying where do I fit into this whole complex thing of storytelling? you know, in the sense. So at the one time that there's other actors talk about this, my discussion is whether this rapper is going to get this job or whether this movie is going to be made about some buffoonery. You understand? And that is the sense in that. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with buffoonery, but buffoonery has to take place where there's a larger, more responsive collection of storytelling. It just can't be the only kind of storytelling. You understand? You know?
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, everybody.
Oh, did we? Oh. That's all. Oh, man. I'm sorry, man.